The man who took Nancy Guthrie is already in a database. His family tree already exists in a server somewhere in the United States. And right now, a lab in Florida is running a process that has put serial killers behind bars after over 4 decades on the run. And the only thing standing between that process and a name is a question nobody in the media has fully answered for you. How does it actually work? What is genuinely blocking it? And what can you, sitting right where you are, do to change the outcome? A forensic process that has identified killers hiding for 40 years in a matter of hours. Yes, hours have begun in this case. And this video is going to tell you exactly why, whose decision made it this way, and what one specific group of people can do right now to change it. Here is the promise that investigative genetic genealogy made to this case and to every person who has been following it. The same science that caught the Golden State Killer. A man who raped and murdered across California for more than a decade and hid for over 40 years has been applied to the day recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. The same science that identified Brian Koberger as the man who killed 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 is running on the biological material found at this crime scene right now. And the person who has done more to deploy that science in active criminal investigations than anyone alive, forensic genetic genealogist CeCe Moore, went on national television in February and said something that should have ended the conversation. She looked directly into the camera and said,
I was the kidnapper, I would be extremely concerned right now because using investigative genetic genealogy, he will be identified.
Will, not might, not could, will. That was day 19 of the search. This is day 58. No arrest, no suspect. No name. And CeCe Moore is still right. The science has not failed, but between the promise she made and the silence that followed, something happened. Several things happened. And almost none of them have been explained in a way that is honest about the full picture. So that is the gap this video is going to close. Not by walking you through how genetic genealogy works. You have seen that explainer 100 times in the past 2 months. But by asking the question that explainer always avoids, if the science is this powerful, if the expert is this confident, if the DNA is in a lab in Florida right now, then what, specifically, is standing between that lab and a name on an arrest warrant? And who, specifically, made the decisions that put it there? There are 3 answers to that question. The first is a decision made by the investigators themselves. The second is a decision made by 3 corporations. The third is a decision being made right now, at this moment, by ordinary people, possibly including you. Start with what is actually in the lab, because the coverage has been loose with this. And loose facts produce loose understanding, and loose understanding is how 58 days pass without the public grasping what has and has not happened. 3 categories of biological material were collected at or near the Guthrie crime scene. The first is Nancy's own blood, found on the front porch, confirmed by DNA analysis to belong to her. It is not forensically useful for identification purposes. It tells investigators the crime happened there. It tells them nothing about who did it. The second is the gloves, found approximately 2 miles from the home. An FBI spokesperson confirmed in February that one glove appeared to match those worn by the suspect in the doorbell camera footage. Analysts treated this as a major development. It was not. The DNA on the glove traced back to a local restaurant worker with no connection to the case. That lead is closed, and CeCe Moore had been cautious about it from the beginning. She told ABC News the DNA found inside the home was far more compelling, precisely because 2 miles of separation creates a chain of custody problem the glove evidence could never fully overcome. The third category is the one that matters. Unknown male, DNA recovered from inside the property. DNA that is not Nancy's, that is not from anyone known to have had close contact with her. DNA that Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC News investigators believe may belong to the suspect.
But we do have some DNA, and we'll continue to work with the lab on that DNA analysis.
That is what is in the Florida lab. That is what the clock is running on. And that DNA ran into something the moment it was submitted for testing. No match in CODIS. CODIS, the FBI's national database of roughly 22 million convicted criminal profiles. No hit. Which means whoever took Nancy Guthrie either has never been arrested for a crime that required a DNA sample or was arrested somewhere that does not contribute to the federal database. Either way, the traditional forensic path closed immediately. And what came after it is what this entire video is really about. Here is the first decision, the one made by investigators, that belongs in this conversation and has received almost no serious coverage. When the Pima County Sheriff's Department collected the DNA evidence from Nancy Guthrie's property, they did not send it to the FBI's laboratory at Quantico. Quantico is one of the most advanced forensic DNA facilities in the world. It operates under active kidnapping protocols. It has the fastest turnaround times in domestic law enforcement for high-priority cases. In an investigation where an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and daily medication has been missing since February 1st, faster turnaround isn't a preference. It is the difference between life and death. They sent it to a private lab in Florida instead. That decision drew quiet concern from federal investigators. Sources briefed on the investigation told CBS News there was early concern about whether the DNA collected would yield a usable profile at all. A concern that some attributed not to the nature of the evidence, but to the handling and processing choices made in the early days. Another law enforcement source pushed back and said the private lab actually has advantages for the genetic genealogy phase. CeCe Moore herself told News Nation that DNA Labs International, the lab believed to be involved, has the capability to generate the SNP profile that the IgG process requires and that the FBI does not have that capability in-house. She said, and this is worth sitting with, she thought it was actually a good decision to send it to that lab. So the lab choice is genuinely contested. What is not contested is what was found when the sample arrived. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home is what scientists call a mixed sample. It contains genetic material from more than one person. That is common in violent crimes. When a confrontation happens in a space, biological material from multiple people gets deposited on the same surfaces. But a mixed sample creates a specific problem for genetic genealogy that a single contributor sample does not have. The process cannot begin on a mixed sample, not directly. First, bioinformatics scientists have to work the file, separate the genetic contribution of the different individuals present in the mixture, and extract a single source profile belonging specifically to the suspect. That extraction is an additional phase of work before the genealogy process can even start. It takes time. In a mixed sample with multiple unknown contributors, it takes more time. And CeCe Moore told the News Nation Truth of the Matter podcast something about this particular case that almost no one in the coverage has fully absorbed.
That means that they don't right now currently have the ability to separate it, and they're hoping that the science is going to advance.
The headline version was, "Genetic genealogy could crack this case." The actual version from the mouth of the world's most experienced forensic genetic genealogist is that the sample in this case is complicated enough that the current technology may be insufficient to isolate the suspect's individual DNA contribution from the mixture, and that investigators may be waiting not just for the lab to finish, but for the science itself to catch up. Moore was careful not to say it is impossible. She said she remains hopeful. She said the lab is very good at what it does. But she also said if they are struggling with it, that tells me it is a very difficult sample. That phrase is the most honest assessment of where this investigation actually stands on the forensic side, and it has been buried under a wave of optimistic coverage that has not served the public or the family. The mixed sample is not a dead end. Harder? Yes. Slower? Yes. Impossible? No. But it means the clock that CC Moore said was running on day 19 has been running slower than anyone publicly. That's acknowledged. And the public deserves to know that. If this is the first time you are getting the unfiltered version of where this investigation actually stands, not the press release version, not the headline version, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the bell. Because every time there is a development in this case, we are going to be here breaking it down at exactly this level. And if you know someone who has been following this case and has not seen this, share it with them before you keep watching. The second decision, and this one was made not by investigators but by 3 corporations, is the one with the most direct, most fixable consequence for this investigation. The number the coverage has mentioned and then moved past is 2 million. That is how many DNA profiles exist in the databases that law enforcement can legally access for investigative genetic genealogy, GED match, family tree, DNA, and DNA Justice, a database CC Moore herself created, specifically to address the law enforcement access problem, which currently holds fewer than 7,000 profiles. 2 million. That is the pool investigators are searching. Now, here is the number that explains everything. 50 million. That is how many Americans have taken direct-to-consumer DNA tests with Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, or MyHeritage. 50 million people whose genetic information is already digitized, already sitting in a server, already capable of being searched for matching family members of a crime scene DNA profile. 48 million of those profiles are locked. Not because the technology cannot access them, but because those 3 companies have made a deliberate corporate decision to bar law enforcement from doing so. They cite user privacy. They cite informed consent. They say their customers signed up to find their grandmother's birthplace, not to become investigative assets in a kidnapping case. And that position has a logic to it. But the operational consequence of that position in this specific case, at this specific moment, is that investigators searching for the man who took an 84-year-old woman are working from 2 million profiles instead of 50 million. Barbara Ray Venter, the genealogist who first broke the Golden State Killer case open in 2018, made the direct comparison to NBC News. She said that if investigators working the Guthrie case could be using Ancestry or 23andMe or even MyHeritage, those databases are huge. 10, 20 times as many people. And that suddenly time is really important when you are working something like this case. That quote was published in February. It is now the end of March. The databases are still closed. Moore told CNN that investigators could attempt to serve a warrant on the larger databases. Her prediction of what would happen: a knockdown, drag-out fight. In an active kidnapping case with a missing 84-year-old woman, a protracted legal battle over database access is not a path. It is a delay, measured in months. Months that may not be available. But here is what is available. What has always been available. And what almost no one in the coverage has said plainly enough. If you have taken a DNA test with Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, or MyHeritage, you can download your raw data file from any of those platforms today, upload it to GED Match or Family Tree DNA for free, and opt in. Specifically, deliberately, knowingly opt in to allow law enforcement comparison. That moves your profile from the locked 50 million into the accessible 2 million. That is not a passive act. That is a direct contribution to the investigative pool. And the difference between the accessible database and the closed one is not theoretical. It is the difference, in real cases, between an identification that happens in hours and one that takes months or never comes at all. Now here is the variable that makes the database size problem even more consequential in this specific case. The accessible databases, GED match, family tree DNA, are not just smaller than the closed ones, they are also demographically skewed in a way that had direct bearing on how quickly a match could come back. The profiles in those 2 million are predominantly people with Northwest European ancestry and deep American roots. Families that have been in the United States for multiple generations, whose relatives took DNA tests out of curiosity about their heritage, and whose genetic footprint in the database is therefore wide. Moore explained this with the same precision in every outlet she spoke to.
If they have deep roots in the United States, it could be minutes, it could be a few hours.
But if his ancestry runs through Latin America, through recent immigration, through populations that are underrepresented in American genealogy databases, the process could take weeks, months, or more.
But if it's somebody who doesn't have connections to the US in their tree in more recent generations, then it could take much longer.
She told Newsweek specifically, "We have a lot of those Hispanic cases, and they tend to take weeks, months, or years compared to somebody with deep roots in the United States and primarily Northwest European ancestry." Now consider what is publicly known about this case. Pima County borders Mexico. The FBI contacted Mexican authorities early in the investigation. The ransom notes, if authentic, involved cryptocurrency framing that investigators acknowledged has international dimensions. The Tucson metro area is demographically diverse in ways that make ancestral representation in American genealogy databases genuinely uncertain for any given suspect. None of that is a conclusion about who took Nancy Guthrie. But all of it means that the 48 million profiles sitting in the locked databases are not an abstract problem. They are the direct operational gap between a process that finds a match in hours and one that runs for months and may not find one at all. The investigators and the Guthrie family have both said publicly they believe the suspect is from the Tucson area. That regional framing suggests American roots, but regional and ancestral are not the same thing. A person can live in Tucson for 30 years and still have a family tree rooted in a population the accessible databases do not adequately cover. And that is the specific uncertainty Moore flagged when she said the timeline on this case depends on the population group the suspect belongs to and luck. Everything in this video is sourced and verified. The links are in the description, every claim traced back to the primary interview or report. If you want to cross-reference anything, it is all there. And if you have been following this case for weeks and this is the first time you have heard it laid out this way, drop a comment. Tell us what you think is being missed. The conversation in this section has been sharper than anything in the mainstream coverage, and we read it. There is a second investigative thread running parallel to the genealogy process, one that CeCe Moore raised directly in her most recent News Nation appearance, and that has received almost no follow-through in the coverage. Understanding it requires accepting a premise. The mainstream media has been reluctant to state plainly that the primary crime scene may have already given investigators everything it can give them, and that the next evidentiary break may not come from the lab in Florida, but from a location that has not yet been found. Moore's observation was this: the home on Cali Buena Vista has been processed and released. Law enforcement has done what it can do there. But the moment Nancy Guthrie was moved, the moment she was placed in a vehicle, transported somewhere, held somewhere, a second crime scene was created. Wherever that place is, the suspect was there. He touched surfaces, he handled objects, he existed in that space without the level of preparation and concealment that characterized his visit to her home. And every surface he touched in that second location is a potential biological deposit, a potential cleaner sample, a potential single contributor profile that does not carry the mixed sample complications that have slowed the work in Florida. Moore said it quietly, carefully, the way someone says something they do not want to have to say. She does not want to hope for a second crime scene or for remains to be found. But she was equally clear about the forensic logic. If Nancy is still alive and being held somewhere, that place is already a second crime scene.
If she's kidnapped and held against her will, that place she's being held is a second crime scene. Or if she was deceased, in the car or something, again, that is also what I would call a second crime scene.
The evidence is already there. It is waiting to be found. This connects directly to the 3 dates that investigators have been publicly focused on: January 11th, January 24th, and the early morning hours of February 1st. The significance of those 3 dates is not just the footage they may have captured, it is the geographic footprint they represent. A suspect who was in this neighborhood on at least 2 separate occasions before, the night of the abduction, was moving through this area, potentially touching surfaces across multiple locations, potentially captured on cameras that have not yet been collected and reviewed. That geographic footprint is an investigative map. Every point on it is a potential secondary sample source. The FBI asked neighbors about footage going back to January 1st. They specifically inquired about January 11th and January 24th. One neighbor told NBC News she was asked about footage from January 24th, a date that generated almost no public coverage, but which signals that investigators have a specific reason to believe the suspect's geographic footprint in the area extends across at least 3 separate dates, 3 visits, 3 potential evidence deposits, 3 opportunities for secondary biological material that does not carry the same mixed sample problems as the primary scene. Whether any of that secondary material has been collected, processed, or yielded a workable profile is not information investigators have released, but the investigative logic is clear. And CC Moore made it explicit. What may break this case is not the primary sample finally yielding to the lab. It may be a second location at a second surface, a second deposit, clean, single source, and ready to run. Now, set that against what this investigation has publicly delivered in 58 days, and the honest accounting becomes uncomfortable. The FBI Bluetooth helicopter equipped to detect Nancy's pacemaker signal found nothing. President Trump criticized investigators publicly for disclosing the use of that technology, saying it gave whoever took her the opportunity to respond. The cadaver dogs that were active early in the search have been stood down. The home has been released back to the family. The glove DNA traced to an uninvolved restaurant worker. The mixed sample is in Florida with a timeline that Moore herself described as potentially contingent on technology that does not yet exist. Former Pima County Sheriff and former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona went on News Nation and said Nanos made a fundamental error by personally announcing the reopening of the crime scene. His words were, "That is not something a sheriff does." The Pima County Sheriff's own deputies union passed a unanimous no-confidence vote. The Board of Supervisors invoked a territorial-era law to compel Nanos to testify under oath about his disciplinary history, with a hearing scheduled for April 7th. The recall petition filed in March needs more than 120,000 signatures in 120 days. None of that means the case is over. The FBI is still running. The DNA is still in the lab. The genealogy process is still active. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek something that cuts through every layer of this. The number one way this case gets solved may not be the lab at all. It may be a person, a girlfriend, a family member, Someone who knows what was done and is weighing the $1.2 million reward, $1 million from the Guthrie family, $200 and $2,500 from the FBI, against the weight of what they are carrying. Those two paths, the science and the human tip, are not competing. They are running simultaneously, and either one can close the gap that 58 days have left open. There is one more piece of the public record that belongs here. On March 25th, Savannah Guthrie sat down with Today colleague Hoda Kotba for her first formal interview since her mother disappeared. 53 days into the search, she said her family is in agony.
We are in agony. It is unbearable.
She said the word unbearable. She said that in the darkness, in the middle of the night, she wakes up and imagines her mother's terror. And she said something specific that carries a forensic dimension worth naming. Savannah said, someone needs to do the right thing. She needs to come home now. That appeal is aimed at the kidnapper, but former FBI agent Harry Trombitas told Yahoo News that the timing of the interview, coordinated, formal, placed precisely at the 53-day mark, was almost certainly not coincidental. His assessment: that kind of interview is likely coordinated between the sheriff's office, the FBI, and the Guthrie family. Its goals, in his reading, are specific. Keep the case in the public eye, humanize Nancy to a suspect who may be watching, and apply pressure on anyone in the suspect's orbit who might be on the edge of coming forward. That is not a family acting from despair alone. That is a family still executing strategy. And strategy at 53 days, coordinated with law enforcement, is consistent with an investigation that has not given up and has not gone cold, whatever the external silence suggests. And then there is the sheriff. Whatever one thinks of Chris Nannis's handling of the investigation, and the record is contested enough that the Board of Supervisors, his own deputies union, and a former U.S. Surgeon General have each raised formal concerns. He made one statement in his March 13th NBC appearance that carries specific investigative weight. He said, investigators believe they know why Nancy Guthrie was targeted. He said the crime was deliberate.
There's so much that everybody wants to know, right? But I would be very neglectful, irresponsible as a police law enforcement leader to share that with everybody.
And he said, without elaboration, that it would be silly to give the public an all clear because the suspect could strike again. The phrase "could strike again" has two implications. The first is the obvious public safety warning. The second is less obvious but more forensically interesting. If the suspect has a pattern, if the targeting of Nancy Guthrie was part of a logic that could repeat, then the investigative profile of this person is narrowing in ways the public is not being told about. Investigators who believe they know the motive are investigators who have a framework for the suspect's psychology, their relationship to the victim, and potentially their identity. A framework that, combined with the genealogy process, may be converging on a name in ways that will only become visible the moment the arrest is announced. If you have taken a DNA test with Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, or MyHeritage, the action is simple. Download your raw data file, upload it to GED Match or Family Tree DNA. Opt in to law enforcement comparison. That is it. That one step, taken by enough people, is what the difference between the accessible database and the locked one actually looks like in practice. Joseph D'Angelo was caught because a distant cousin did exactly that without knowing what it would mean. You can do it deliberately. The links are in the description. It takes 15 minutes. Do it now. There is a procedural reality about how this science works that almost no coverage has explained, and it matters for how you interpret the silence that has surrounded this case for the past several weeks. When investigative genetic genealogy produces a credible candidate name, investigators Do not announce it. There is no press conference. There is no leak. What happens instead is this. The investigative team places the candidate under covert physical surveillance. They follow the person. They wait for that person to discard biological material in a public space, a coffee cup, a used tissue, anything, and they collect it without the person's knowledge. That sample goes to the lab for a direct comparison against the crime scene DNA. If it matches, they have confirmation. If it matches, they have probable cause. If it matches, a warrant is issued and an arrest follows. This means that the most critical phase of the entire forensic process, the phase immediately after a genealogy hit, is the most quiet. The public knows nothing. The suspect knows nothing. The media reports nothing because there is nothing to report. And the silence from the Pima County Sheriff's Department that has frustrated the Guthrie family and the true crime community in the past several weeks is consistent with two completely different realities. Either the investigation is stalled, or it is at exactly the moment it is supposed to be silent. Former Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Krieger told Parade that detectives are making daily progress. His exact framing, they are 24 hours closer every single day. That is not a statement of breakthrough. It is a statement of process. And process, in a case built on forensic genetic genealogy, is exactly what the silence looks like from the outside. CeCe Moore gave her timeline assessment in February. She does not think this case will take years. She said the level of resources being dedicated to it means the FBI's own genetic genealogy team, 200 agents, would be brought in if the process runs too long. She predicted weeks, maybe months. That statement was made in February. It is now the end of March, which puts this investigation at or past the outer edge of what Moore described as the expected range, which means one of three things. The lab has already produced something and is in the covert surveillance phase, or the mixed sample has proven harder than anticipated and the timeline has extended beyond Moore's prediction, or the FBI genetic genealogy team has already been engaged and the process is running at a level the public is not being told about. The title of this video asks whether genetic genealogy may crack the case in the search for Nancy Guthrie. That word, may, is doing more work than it looks like. It is not hedging. It is not uncertainty inserted for legal safety. It is the honest framing of a forensic process that has caught serial killers hiding for more than 40 years and solved cold cases from 3 decades ago in a single afternoon, and that is currently running on a mixed sample in a private lab in Florida, while a structural gap between 2 million accessible profiles and 50 million locked ones sits as the most consequential single obstacle between that lab and an arrest warrant. The science may crack this case. The DNA may yield a clean profile. The suspect's ancestry may be represented in the databases law enforcement can legally access. A secondary location may surface and produce a cleaner sample than the primary scene provided. A person who knows what happened may decide the reward, or the weight of what they are carrying, is worth more than continued silence. Any of those things could happen tomorrow, or the mixed sample may continue to resist the extraction process. The suspect's family tree may sit inside a database investigators cannot access without a legal fight measured in months. The geography may have changed, and the investigation may be further from resolution than the optimistic framing of February's coverage allowed the public to believe. What sits between those two outcomes, between the break and the silence, is partly the lab, partly the law, and partly the decision made by every person watching this video who has ever taken a DNA test and never thought about what the law enforcement opt-in checkbox actually meant. The Golden State Killer was identified through a distant relative who checked that box without knowing what it would become. The genealogist who built the tree that led to Joseph D'Angelo was sitting alone at 3 in the morning when the name appeared on her screen. She was not a law enforcement agency. She was a scientist doing the same work that any of us could contribute to by spending 15 minutes and clicking a box. CeCe Moore said the kidnapper should be extremely concerned. She has said it across multiple outlets, multiple formats since week 3 of this case. She is not given to overstatement. She has solved more than 300 cases with this science. She has found killers who hid for 3 decades before the workday was over. When she says it will work, not might, will, she is speaking from a record that does not require optimism. It requires only that the conditions are met: viable DNA, a represented family tree, and time. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 58 days. She was somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother. A woman in the Catalina foothills of Tucson who went to church on Sunday mornings and had dinner with her family on Saturday nights and did not deserve what happened on the night of February 1st. If you have information about her disappearance, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department can be reached at 5203-514900. You can submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. If you have taken a consumer DNA test, go to gedmatch.com or familytreedna.com. Download your raw data from whichever platform you used. Upload it. Opt into law enforcement comparison. It costs nothing. It takes 15 minutes, and it may be the thing that closes this case, even if you never know it was you. If this breakdown reached something the daily coverage didn't, if the gap between the promise this, science made, and the reality of where this investigation stands landed differently than what you have been reading, share it. Put it in front of people in Tucson. Put it in front of people who have taken a DNA test. And subscribe. Because the moment this case breaks, this channel will be the first place it gets the full treatment it deserves.